All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you all for joining us this month. My name is Brittany Hawthorne. I'm a wellness coordinator at Florida Healthcare Plans. So without further ado, I present Breaking Emotional Connection Strategies for Managing Emotional Eating. and I'd also like to introduce our guest speaker today. His name is Nathan Wharton, and I'll tell you a little about him. He is a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. As an experienced clinician, Nathan uses a variety of treatment techniques and counseling sessions depending on the needs of individuals. Among the approaches he employs are cognitive behavior, person-centered, and solution-focused therapies. Nathan has experience helping individuals with food addiction, binge eating, and a multitude of other eating disorders. Due to personal experience with food addiction and binge eating, he believes that people who have an unhealthy relationship with food can learn to overcome the power it has over them. He uses cognitive behavior techniques to help clients identify self-defeating thoughts and behaviors. Additionally, he sees patients dealing with issues such as mood disorder, depression, anxiety, trauma, and grief. He believes in empowering each client to overcome obstacles to achieve fulfillment and happiness, and that each individual has the ability to find within themselves the motivation to achieve success. Therapy is a collaborative, sharing experience and should be used to help feel comfortable, hopeful, and truly understanding. So I will now pass the stage over to Mr. Nathan. Thank you.
So what we're going to go over is sort of techniques and strategies that we're going to use to break emotional connections. With food and nutrition, we create and have a lot of emotional connections. And that's really why we deal with a lot of emotional eating issues. So we're going to take kind of a step-by-step approach looking at some of the emotional connections and talk about specific strategies for the various types of emotional connections. So we can go on to the next slide. So one of the big things that we want to start with is how we talk about nutrition and about food. Often the way that we use words and phrases to look at food, creates a negative relationship with nutrition and food. One of the examples I like to use is the language of "I have a sweet tooth." I use this example because it's something that I hear often when I work with clients and patients. And the reality of it is whenever you use this type of language, you sort of adopt that perception. So if you say things like, "I have a sweet tooth," or "I need dessert before I go to bed," it becomes a reality in your life. And so you have to really watch like those words that you use around food. Another one that I like to talk about is how we label food as good food or bad food. Every time that we give food this label and these names, it provides it more power than it should have. Food is just food. Anything beyond that is the power you decide to give it. So whenever you label it as, well, I'm being good today or I'm being bad today based on what you're eating, you're giving food a lot more power than it should have. Really, the way that we want to look at nutrition is, are you eating for self-care? Are you making the choices that perpetuate good self-care? We're struggling and trying to do that every single day. And it takes a lot of consistency to strive to eat nutrition for self-care. And then we want to be careful around using, I'm going on a diet and looking at, this cycle of going on and off diets. I think it's really dangerous to look at things like that and say, well, at this time I'm going to diet and then I'm going to go off a diet and then on a diet. And the back and forth cycle, it creates a very unhealthy relationship when it comes to food. And so every day we're looking at, am I eating for self-care? I think that's a big part of this whole presentation is looking at nutrition as that beginning of self-care and that we're eating for self-care. And one of the things I always talk about with, eating for self-care versus eating, trying to go on a diet is whenever you're talking about a diet, the goal is to lose weight. But whenever you look at self-care is to nourish yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually whenever it comes to nutrition and choosing nutrition that does that for you. So be careful with the language. Next slide. One of the biggest emotional connections that patients and clients that I see talk about is how food is love. That's something that you have to be very careful with whenever we're looking at our culture and society. We show and receive a lot of love through food, and that's not necessarily a healthy way to look at food. So whenever you're trying to break this emotional connection, some of the main strategies that we can use is create new bonding experiences that are not related to food. A lot of times whenever you form a connection with a person, things like going on a date or doing things together, it revolves around eating out together and around the food. Now, there's nothing wrong with going to a restaurant together. The problem is when that's the only bonding experience that you have, it becomes an issue. And so you want to, maybe go out to dinner together and then do something else that you both enjoy to create bonding experiences that are not just food related. When it comes to like traditions such as what you do around Christmas time or Thanksgiving and so on, if it's only surrounded about the food, it's an unhealthy way to look at that. So you want to work on creating new traditions around these holidays that are not necessarily centered around, food. And this can bring up issues. And so I think it's important to communicate that with your support system and, say, I think it's important that we do other things and, talk to them about it. I'm trying to break an emotional connection that food is love. And, these are ways that you can help me with that. Another thing with food is love is sometimes, that's how we show someone, they had a bad day and I know that if I make this for them or I buy this food for them, it cheers them up. That creates an unhealthy relationship with food as well. And so you want to talk and you want to communicate with your support system about other ways that they can show their love that's not necessarily food related. And one of the things we want to look at, when we talk about food and exercise as the self-care, but also as self-love. One of the problems whenever we look at going on diets or trying to implement exercise plans is we look at it almost as punishment to ourselves. I gained weight or I did this to myself, so I want to exercise or I want to diet because I need to lose weight is almost like a punishment instead of looking at it as nourishing and doing what's best for your body. Exercise and good nutrition is about doing what's best for you. It's not about punishment or trying to lose as much weight as fast as possible. And a big part of this whole process to look at food and nutrition as love is it's about keeping that promise to yourself that this is what you deserve, that you deserve to treat yourself well. And whenever you make those promises to yourself that you're going to treat yourself well and you follow through with it, you start to build more and more trust. A lot of times it's hard to make lifestyle change because we start to lose trust in ourselves. We don't really trust ourselves because we don't follow through with it. Think about it like that. I'm following through with this to demonstrate that love and trust in myself. Okay, next slide. All right, food is comfort. That's another big emotional connection that patients and clients discuss whenever I meet with them. So we have a lot of good strategies to kind of minimize and reduce using food in a comfort way. One of the biggest things is, your environment, where you eat. This is a really big deal. Because if you do things like eat in front of the TV or eat in these comfort and relaxation zones, you start to train your mind to use food as part of your relaxation process. And so a lot of times whenever you are stressed or emotional, it's sort of your go-to response to use food to help you comfort. So the best advice I can give for that is to have designated eating areas inside your house. Say, this is my eating area and this is my relaxation area. And they don't necessarily connect. I'm going to have my my eating, and then I'm going to go to my comfort and relaxation area. One of the things whenever people use food as comfort, they often, eat differently whenever they're by themselves because it's more comforting. So you want to challenge yourself, to always eat the same, whether you're with people or alone. Kind of use food for the right reasons. You want to dictate food instead of letting food dictate you. The whole process of this is to say, okay, well, I'm going to use food this way. I'm not doing it because this is what sounds good to me, or because I need to be comforted. And we want to avoid using the phrase comfort foods. Using that word, another thing with the language around food, but labeling stuff as comfort foods really makes you buy into the idea that is what comforts you. Your perception again becomes reality. So one of the main things we can do to sort of take power away from food is looking at it as food is just food. It's just, whenever you work with a dietitian or nutrition specialist, you realize that food is the only thing that makes up food is proteins, fats, and carbs. And certain levels of proteins, fats, and carbs is that, that's what's best for your nourishment. And that's what food is. It's just that nourishment. Food is just food. All right, next slide. All right, food is stress management. So the biggest thing with reducing using food in stressful situation is to really take an evaluation of your coping skills and your self-care needs. Later on in the presentation, we're going to kind of individually talk about these different types of self-care. But to reduce using food in stress management type of situations, it's important to kind of take stock of your self-care and look at, where is your self-care lacking? Am I not doing good self-care in one area or another? Because oftentimes we utilize food to replace what we're missing with self-care. And it's also important to do what I call diversify your coping skills. A lot of times we can become way too reliant on one coping skill and it loses its value over time. So if you diversify your coping skills or you have multiple types of coping skills, they won't lose their power over time. They're still going to help you long term. All right, next slide. Culture is something that I hear often whenever patients are struggling with making lifestyle changes around nutrition. I hear it all the time that, because I'm, this culture, I have to eat this food. And that becomes a really big problem because, you're using food, the language that I talked about, you're making it a reality that, that just because the culture says you have to eat this way, that you have to eat this way. And that's not necessarily true, right? Again, if food is just nourishment and fuel, culture maybe has created an unhealthy relationship with that food over time. So you want to look at that. You want to have, you want to start challenging those cultural beliefs around food. Why is it that food has to be used this way for your identity? So in most situations, food does not have to be about your identity, right? Food just comes back to your self-care and nourishment, and it doesn't have to be, because you're this culture, you align with certain types of foods. One of the big things that you can do as far as a strategy for that is, of course, talk to your family. Have a real and open conversation about what nutrition means to you and how you are deciding to use nutrition from this point forward. And hopefully your family is open and understands, so whenever you have these family get-togethers and functions that, they're going to say, okay, well, I get it. And maybe not put you in a difficult situation, or say, I can't believe you're not eating this special meal that we all eat together. So really, it's important to challenge those beliefs and to talk to your family about those kind of things. Next slide. So overall, what we're trying to do whenever we look at, emotional eating is we're looking to shift the power and control. We're trying to take the power away from food, or as I tell patients that come in here, we're trying to knock it off its pedestal. Culture and society, whatever, has really elevated what food is and created it and gave it a lot more control. So whenever you put barriers in place or whatever, the different things that come up and different problems that you see as you're trying to make these lifestyle changes, it's about taking your power in those situations and looking at what you can do to move around the barrier, right? It's barriers are there to figure out how to get around them, right? And that's what we're looking at. It's about taking your power and saying, well, what can I do whenever I'm faced with these certain situations? You're responsible for your own happiness. And, if better nutrition is going to create better happiness for you, then we want to do that. We want to look at how we're going to perpetuate that. And how you look at food becomes key. It's a lot of times when we look at, I'm feeling deprived, right? That's words that I hear often. If I don't eat these foods, I'm deprived. And, something I say to the patients often is, deprivation is a perception-based system. If you sit there and tell yourself that you're deprived, then you're going to feel that way. But if you look at food as, this is the type of food that I need to fuel my mind, body, and spirit, you're changing and you're spinning that thought about it. It's really what you deserve is health and, is nutrition for fuel and to feel the best that you can. And that's, so we're trying to shift that power and control overall by managing these emotional connections. All right, next slide. So one of the biggest strategies for managing emotional eating is structure, right? The more structure you have, the more control you have, and the less emotional connection. So sometimes patients look at, creating structure and tracking and planning and things like that as a chore, right? Or, it's not really worth the hassle, things like that. I always kind of look at tracking and your nutritional structure is almost like a roadmap. And, what I always say to the patients whenever they come in is, if you had a certain place that you needed to go and you had to drive to get there, and you didn't know how to get there, you wouldn't just drive around until you figured out how to get there. You would use GPS or a map to do that. That's what nutritional structure does. If you have a goal in mind and you want to, use food for health of it and to feel great, you need a roadmap for that. And that's what tracking and that nutritional structure is going to do for you. It's going to give you that roadmap to accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish. Like I said before, whenever you have a plan and you follow through with a nutritional plan, it takes emotional connection out of it. One of the sayings that I use often is, anytime you say that sounds good or I feel like eating, whenever you're referring to your choices during the day, there's some emotional reasons so that's really part of emotional eating, is choosing foods based on what sounds good to you or what you feel like eating. If you know what you're going to do and you have it mapped out and it fits your nutritional needs for that day and it is the proper fuel, there's no emotional connection to it. You're taking the emotional connection out of it. Basically you're separating the emotional connection. And I hear it often, and it's like, how do you manage craving, right? And unfortunately, it's not an easy answer, because cravings are an emotional connection related to food. But the best advice I can give is to, create your plan, create your structure, and follow through with it. It's not easy at first. So whenever you're dealing with cravings, it's going to be difficult in the beginning to sever those cravings and that connection. But over time of not giving into cravings, they become less and less. A lot of times people believe that I have to satisfy this craving to get rid of it. But really what happens whenever you satisfy a craving is you reinforce a craving. You're basically telling your mind that it's okay to give into this emotional connection. And so by not giving into cravings over a period of time with consistency, you sort of start to sever the emotional connections. And that's what structure really does. Nutritional structure also reduces the amount of time that you spend thinking about food. If you know what you're going to eat and you follow through with that plan, you don't have to spend the day trying to figure out what you're going to do for dinner. Something that I hear patients and clients talk about a lot is, one of the biggest reasons that they tend to make the wrong choices in the evening time is the lack of planning or the lack of structure. It's that back and forth that they have with a spouse or a loved one of, what are we going to eat? I don't know what you want to eat. And eventually, they're tired of talking about it, so they make the wrong decision. So really, it actually reduces time spent thinking about food. And what patients find is they actually have more time to think about other things that are not food. So it actually can a lot of times save time to have that structure. But that's probably the biggest strategy that you're going to use for that emotional connections with food. All right, next slide. All right, so self-care and emotional eating, right? Self-care is sort of the whole big picture of this presentation. And I believe that nutrition is the foundation of self-care, right? And the reason that I say nutrition is the foundation of self-care because how we think, how we physically feel, how we manage stress is all from the fuel that we put in. So whenever you put in the fuel that's right for your body, you deal with those things better, right? And so your whole foundation for self-care is built on starting with good nutrition. So you're going to find that everything becomes a little easier whenever you use food in the right way, when you have that proper nutrition. Having good self-care overall, even outside of nutrition, is going to help with stress, anxiety. It's important to take an honest look at your self-care and to kind of start to question where you might be lacking in self-care. One of the best ways that I always recommend doing that is having some type of self-care journal where you look at, okay, well, today, and here's where I'm going to fit self-care in, and to track that. Nutrition journals can track it, exercise journals, but also looking at what you're doing for the other types of self-care that we're going to look at here in a second. And develop your self-care plan. Use your journal to help you develop that stuff. All right, next slide. So physical self-care. It's nutrition falls under that physical self-care. So physical self-care, again, is one of the foundations that we're looking at. It also includes exercise and sleep. And, I kind of mentioned this a little bit before, but the perception of what physical self-care, that's something that needs to be looked at, right? You're not doing physical self-care to punish yourself. You're doing it because it's what you deserve, right? You deserve to exercise. You deserve to have good nutrition. You're not going on diets and you're not exercising to burn calories. You're doing these things because it's what's best for your mind, body, and spirit. All right, next slide. Emotional self-care. This one, is something that gets left out a lot, I think, whenever I talk to patients. I think that they feel they only have time for certain things, and emotional self-care often gets left out. This is the time spent talking to your support system. So it's important to surround yourself with a good, strong support system and to talk to them, have conversations with them. Sometimes journaling is a big part of this emotional self-care. It's about writing about your feelings and your emotions. Whenever you write out your feelings and emotions, you can reflect on that. You can actually have an honest conversation about how you're feeling and how your everyday life is making you feel, so that you can work on making changes. Be quick to forgive yourself, right? We're all going to make mistakes. We make them often. We're human beings. And so you have to have some self-compassion. We want to treat ourselves the way that we would treat a loved one, right? But often we're so hard on ourselves. But we need to do our best to talk to ourselves in the same way that we would talk to the people that we love. And plan out me time, right? Along with that structure with nutrition, you also want to have time for yourself. It's important. It's important to have reflection and time to say, well, this is things that I love, right? Sometimes you can combine physical self-care with emotional self-care when it relates to me time. Sometimes gym time is a great place to have both emotional self-care and physical self-care, because it can become your me time. All right, next slide. Social adventure self-care, right? One of the best ways that you can do this is find support groups for things that you're struggling with. And you may not have time to find in-person support groups all the time, but there's a lot of Facebook support groups out there as well where people can relate to what you're going through. So it's okay to use those kind of things. It's okay to use virtual support groups. Sometimes it's okay to push yourself outside of comfort zones, right? It's hard sometimes to get out of your comfort zone. But our mind needs it. It needs sometimes to do things that we're not comfortable with to kind of stimulate our mind. It's okay to rekindle past hobbies. Over time, as we get older, a lot of times we stop doing things that we used to love. As things change, you can look back and say, well, what are some of the things that I used to love to do? And kind of figure out ways that you can bring those back into your life. It's important whenever you're looking at, this social self-care to talk, to communicate, to not bottle things up. If something's bothering you, it's important to find someone to talk to. It can be a licensed therapist, or it can be people that you go to that you talk to, like loved ones or people in your life that just understand what you're trying to say. All right, next slide. Spiritual self-care, that's one that's kind of tough for a lot of people, and it can mean a lot of different things to different people. Meditation is a great way for some good spiritual self-care. A lot of people are very afraid of meditation, but there's a lot of great apps out there that will lead you through guided meditation. I've used some of them. Some of them are very good. Volunteer, helping others, things like that. And find your creative outlet. Everybody, I really think that everybody has some form of creative outlet. And that creative outlet is great for your spiritual self-care, And so it's important to sort of find what works for you as a creative outlet. Next slide. But overall, what we're looking at and the overall picture of this is create empowerment through your self-awareness. It's learning to understand yourself. Where do you have struggles? Where are your issues of power and control? Not only with food choices, but with other parts of your life. Really take a look at that and figure out where we can do better. Surround yourself with people that are great for you, that are going to support you, that are there to encourage you. And start having that self-awareness about how we're using food for emotional reasons, and be honest. Am I choosing this food because it's a nourishment choice, or am I choosing this food based on emotions? And really start challenging that. Remember, the more structure you have, the more power you have. And always remember that throughout lifestyle change and for the rest of our lives, we're going to be faced with barriers. we're gonna control things one decision at a time, right? And every barrier you're faced with, I want every person to say, well, what can I do whenever this comes up? Oftentimes with barriers, we always focus on the can't. Because of this, I can't do this, right? Because I have an injury, I can't exercise. But instead of looking at where the injury is and what you can exercise, right? We do the same thing with nutrition. We're on vacation, there's not great choices, so we make the worst choice possible whenever maybe there's a better choice, right? That's what we want to do with barriers. Always look at the best you can do and don't focus on what you can't. All right, next slide. It's the resources. All right. So with East Coast Bariatrics, we do have a non-surgical weight loss program. There is the bariatrics, but not everybody wants to do that. So through the program, you can work with myself to kind of work on these emotional connections with food, to work on positive self-talk and develop strategies. And along the way, you also work with a registered dietitian to gain knowledge about what nourishment is related to your self-care choices around food.
Awesome. I would just like to add to that we do have access to the FHCP Behavioral Health Department as well as member education. Thank you so very much, Nathan. We appreciate it so much. I would like to let you guys know that there is a reference sheet available. You just have to email us at wellness@fhcp.com, and we will send that to you right away. We will see you very, very soon. Thank you so much. Have a great day, guys.